They say that one man's trash is another man's treasure. This simply means that something considered worthless by one person may in fact be valuable to someone else. For Kioko Mwitiki, this is an adage that he has learned to live by. He is the founder of PIMBI Art Gallery. His workshop is best known for his huge life-size sculptures made from scrap metal.
I am a beneficiary of an apprenticeship program. I personally trained in an apprentice workshop where I was apprenticed as a welder in a famous factory in Nakuru way back in 1986, 87 as an apprentice welder, straight from leaving campus. And I learned a lot through the apprenticeship program. So I appreciated the apprenticeship program, which also taught me how to recycle, because that's where I learned to use scrap metal. And so later in my life, I realized that it's something that you can use.
A pioneer of junk art or recycled scrap metal, Kioko opted to use waste materials due to the high costs associated with steel. However, for the artist, his works are more than just pieces of art.
What brought me into this is when I realized that in sculpture, particularly in sculpture, when you're working with metal sculptures, it is very expensive to use steel in this country. Way back then, steel was very expensive. It was not a material that an artist could use. So I had to find out a cheaper material. So when I realized that you can actually use scrap metal, this is what drove me to what I am. And of course, I've been doing this for 25 years. So I've come a long way. And one of the reasons that also made me go into this direction is that I realized that the image of wildlife in Africa, and especially in Kenya, was not being projected in the right way, because a lot of people up to this day tend to associate wildlife with white people. When there's a problem with elephants, it's white people who are put in the forefront, and the people who are the conservationists who tell us how many elephants are left. They're the same people who tell us what to take care of our elephants. After killing our elephants for so many years, I realized that one has to come out and give a different story about wildlife in Africa. And it is different when an artist decides to address a social topic in society in regard to his own understanding.
In a bid to sensitize Kenyans on the need of wildlife conservation, Kioko would establish the PIMBI Art Gallery in 1992. By so doing, he was killing two birds with one stone. One, he would help get rid of waste scrap metal, and two, he would help educate his fellow countrymen on the critical role wildlife plays in Kenya's economy.
I lived in a place where there was wildlife, and we had very interesting relationship with wildlife. So my understanding is that we should be made part of the process of taking care of wildlife, but not sidelined and made to feel guilty, like we are always the people killing the animals, while in the other hand, there are issues that are not being sorted out between how do people relate to these animals.
Kioko, a graduate of fine art from Kenyatta University, is not relenting on his venture. Instead, he is training the next generation of junk metal artists, not only in Kenya, but throughout the East African region.
Apart from just creating the awareness of wildlife through all the many people that I've trained, all the apprentices, all the young people in Nairobi making wildlife, giraffes, rhinos, elephants, all of them have passed through my hands. I've trained them, and they have gone ahead to just show how sensitive the topic of wildlife is. I'm also very involved in using snares. These are wires that I use to trap animals from the parks. These snares are brought to me by KWS, and I turn the snares into art. And what I'm doing is I'm using my skill to train people who are living around parks to use snare wires to make art, and trying to reduce the pressure of bushmeat or people depending too much on the park by trying to make a living out of recycling by using the same snare wires that they use for trapping animals. That is my sole contribution.
Since initiating his apprenticeship program, he has trained over 20 sculptors who are earning directly from the trade.
The biggest problem we have in Kenya right now is lack of apprenticeship. that is completely fallen by the wayside. And you've been seeing, you've read stories and you've heard where we are at the moment. We are lacking artisans. We are lacking so many skilled people because the apprenticeship program is dying out.
Kyoko's works have exhibited in some of the marked capitals of the world. Nevertheless, his pride and joy is the installation of a life-size herd of elephants at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport.
I use all kinds of raw materials. Normally, the raw materials that we have in Africa are very different because, for example, Africans, we are not very wasteful like the West. So we have a tendency of using something up to the last minute. So kama ni sufuria, saa zingine unaweza kuta sufuria imetumika mpaka ikamea tumbo pale chini, ile tumbo ya kupika ugali. So sometimes a sufuria like that can be very useful for me to make a hat.
As a creative and entrepreneur though, it is important for one to continually experiment in order to stay ahead of the pack.
At the moment I'm experimenting with local clay and mixing it with other clays from other areas to create a new material for sculpture that is uniquely Kenyan, which is like kaolin, which is a product that is used to make ceramic pieces, which will give Kenya a brand in terms of art and sculpture, that we have created our own material that can meet international standards in creation of sculpture, especially for the young artists who now want to experiment with new materials, which is also a new contribution in art in this country.
With over 25 years of the sculpturing industry, Kyoko's creations can be completed in 2 weeks or even months. The determining factor is the size and complexity of the artwork. The craftsman prescribes to a 3-part process.
We start off with drawings. We start off with drawings that we cut out. They are called stencil drawings, that we teach the students how to draw so that they are able to get what is called structural form and the proportions of the animals. This is important for the students because without proportions, it's impossible for them to understand the dimensions of the artwork. So once we've done the proportions of the animal, now we transfer the drawing from paper into wire, framework, and metal. We make the framework and form the shape. So that is step number 2. Step number 3 is now we start aligning the whole structure with the scrap that we have. Sometimes you can get colored metal, or you can get scrap that is very close to what the shape of the animal looks, and it's easier.
According to a 2013 report, the art industry is worth an estimated $40 billion. It is this market that Kyoko is hoping to tap into. Even though online sales account for over 20% of art sales, the entrepreneur is adamant that Nairobi can carve a niche for itself in the global art business.
The biggest consumer of our art right now, or the art that I produce, is actually local institutions. We have a lot of hotels and lodges. We have hotels and lodges that collect a lot of these animals or buy these animals and put them up in their lawns or in their gardens. So there is a demand for this kind of art because of the nature of tourism and the nature of the kind of business that goes on here, the wildlife business. Masai Mara, of course, is a huge attraction to foreign tourists, and the hotels there demand this kind of art.
Nonetheless, the sector is facing a unique challenge, the issue of art brokers.
One thing I want to mention is that we also have brokers in art. We have had people who've come into art and they become brokers, and what they present there as Kenyan art is art that has been selected from a few artists and a few groups of people, because these people want to present Africa in a certain way. They want to freeze Africa, and they want to put us in the old traditional spectrum of masks. Africa is no longer just masks. And what people don't also realize that the masks, for example, when you talk about Kenyan art, the masks that you see in Kenya are not from Kenya, they are from West Africa. So in a way they don't represent Kenyan art, but most people who come here will want to look for African masks, which do not give us identity. So one of the reasons that I've been so vocal in that direction is also to give Kenya a stamp and give Kenya a patent out there so that we can have something called Kenyan art.
In the near future, Kioko hopes to open an institute so as to train burgeoning sculptors. So what words of advice does Kioko Mwitiki have for aspiring entrepreneurs?
There is demand for creativity in this country, and there is also demand of creativity from the West, because what is happening in the international world is that Africa is the only remaining place right now full of fresh ideas and fresh creativity. And artists here need to realize that so that they are not exploited, because the fresh ideas right now are coming from Africa in all sorts of ways, in IT, in engineering, in so many ways. Africa is the only recess right now that has not been globalized, because globalization also has opened a whole can of worms, so that you cannot create in isolation. When you create over the internet, and you create over the cloud computing and all that. And by the time artists realize their patents have been taken over by other people in the West and they've lost their rights, and somebody has made a lot of money out of the ideas. So I would say right now there is a seething and a boiling atmosphere of creativity, not just in Kenya, in the whole of Africa, but the artists themselves must realize that and see how they can get hold of that and make it part of their whole system of managing their art.